The room smelled of antiseptic and fear. His fear, not theirs. Julian Gallo lay on the operating table, the cold steel a stark contrast to the fire spreading through his side. A bullet. A messy one. It had torn through muscle and lodged itself stubbornly against a rib. He was awake. He had insisted. General anesthesia was a luxury he could not afford. To be unconscious was to be vulnerable, and Julian Gallo had not survived 52 years by being vulnerable. Not once. The surgeon, a man named Miller whom Julian kept on a very generous, very private retainer, was sweating. His hands, usually steady as a rock, trembled slightly as he arranged his instruments. "Julian, I must advise against this," Miller had said, his voice tight. "The pain will be significant. It could induce shock." Julian had only stared at him. A flat, grey-eyed stare that had ended boardroom negotiations and street-level disputes with equal finality. The discussion was over. So now he lay here, in the clean, sterile room in the basement of one of his own buildings. A clinic for his people. No questions asked. No records kept. He could feel the probing of the local anesthetic, a useless sting against the deeper, throbbing agony. He focused on the ceiling. White tiles. Count them. 1, 2, 3. A small water stain in the corner. He made a mental note to have Leo deal with the leak. And with the man who had put him here. "We need more light," Miller muttered to his assistant. Then, a new presence. A soft sound. The whisper of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. A woman. A nurse. She was not one of his regulars. He knew them all. This one was new. Young. She moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of long hours and little rest. Her face, framed by a simple cap from which a few strands of brown hair had escaped, was pale. Her eyes were large and kind, but shadowed with a deep, weary sadness. She checked the monitors, her movements deft. She adjusted his saline drip without looking at him, as if he were just another body, another task in a long line of them. It was a professionalism he respected. Miller took a deep breath. "All right, Julian. We are beginning." Julian's hands, resting at his sides, clenched into fists. His knuckles were white. He braced himself, his entire body tensing for the first cut. The pain was a known quantity. He could manage pain. It was the lack of control that gnawed at him. The nurse moved to his side. She looked at his face, really looked, for the first time. Her professional mask wavered. She saw not the fearsome man whose name was spoken in whispers, but just a man. A man in pain, trying very hard not to show it. She hesitated for only a second. Then, she did something no one had done in 30 years. She reached out and took his hand. Her hand was small, cool, and surprisingly strong. She did not speak. She simply placed her hand over his clenched fist, her fingers gently wrapping around his. Julian's eyes, which had been fixed on the ceiling, flickered to her face. He was a man untouched by sentiment. A man who had built an empire on cold logic and absolute strength. No one touched him unless invited. No one offered comfort. But he did not pull away. The first incision came. A searing, white-hot line of fire that made his vision swim. A guttural sound was torn from his throat, swallowed before it could fully form. His body arched against the table, a purely involuntary reaction. Her grip tightened. Her thumb began to move in a slow, steady circle on the back of his hand. A simple, maternal gesture. An anchor in a sea of agony. He unclenched his fist and threaded his fingers through hers. His grip was like iron. A drowning man clinging to a life raft. He looked at her again. Her eyes were on his, unwavering. They held no fear. Only a profound, quiet empathy. In that moment, she was not a nurse and he was not Julian Gallo. They were just two people in a sterile room, connected by a simple human touch as the world was pared down to the sharp edge of a scalpel. She held his gaze, and she held his hand. He was awake. He felt everything. And he never let go. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next is a testament to the fact that even the hardest of men can be broken open by the softest of touches. The story of what he did for her, and what she unknowingly did for him, is something you will not want to miss. We appreciate you being here with us today. If you enjoy stories about unexpected heroes and profound connections, please consider giving this video a like and hitting that subscribe button. It helps us bring more narratives like this to you. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's get into it. Julian Gallo was a name that carried weight in the city. To some, it was a name that promised order, a rough but reliable form of justice in neighborhoods the police had long forgotten. To others, it was a name that inspired a deep and abiding fear. He was the ghost of the East Side, a man who moved in the shadows of the financial empire he had built. His legitimate businesses were numerous: real estate, shipping, waste management. They were the clean, public face of an organization that ran on secrets and loyalty. He had rules. Very specific rules. His world, the one he had forged from the ashes of his youth, was governed by a strict code. You did not harm children. You did not prey upon the innocent. You did not bring trouble to the doorsteps of ordinary people. Business was business, and it was conducted between men who understood the risks. Civilians were to be left alone. Violating this code was not just a mistake, it was a sin, and Julian Gallo's justice for sinners was swift and Old Testament in its severity. This code was not born of any noble sentiment. It was born of loss. 30 years ago, there had been an Elena. A woman with eyes as bright as a summer sky and a laugh that could chase away the darkest of moods. She was a teacher, a woman who saw the good in a world that had shown Julian very little of it. They were to be married. But she had been caught in the crossfire of a war that was not hers, a victim of a stray bullet from a rival's gun. Her death had hollowed him out. It had forged the boy he was into the man he became. The part of him that could love, that could feel the warmth of the sun, had been buried with her. What remained was ice and iron. He built his empire as a fortress, not to keep others out, but to keep the chaos that had taken her from ever touching anyone in his orbit again. His protection was a cold, hard shield, not a warm embrace. His right-hand man, Leo, had been with him since the beginning. Leo was a quiet, observant man who understood Julian better than anyone. He knew the history. He knew about Elena. He was the only one who saw the ghost of a different man behind Julian's unreadable grey eyes. Leo was loyal, efficient, and never questioned an order, but he often served as a silent barometer for Julian's rare deviations from protocol. And the nurse was a deviation. After the surgery, which had lasted a grueling 2 hours, Julian had drifted into an exhausted, shallow sleep. But his hand had remained locked with hers. The young nurse, whose name he still did not know, had stayed. She could not pull her hand away without waking him, and some instinct told her not to. So she sat on a small stool, her body aching with fatigue, and watched him sleep. When he finally awoke hours later, the first thing he was aware of was the warmth still encompassing his hand. He opened his eyes. She was there, her head now resting on the edge of the bed, her own eyes closed in sleep. The morning light from a high, barred window touched her face, erasing some of the weariness. In that unguarded moment, she looked impossibly young. And she looked like Elena. Not in feature, or the color of her hair. It was something else. A quiet strength. A gentleness that was not weakness. An aura of simple, unassuming goodness. It was a painful echo of a life he had lost, a phantom limb that suddenly ached with memory. He carefully, slowly, withdrew his hand. The loss of contact was immediate, a sudden coldness. She stirred, waking with a start. Her eyes widened when she saw he was awake. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice husky with sleep. "I must have drifted off." "What is your name?" His own voice was rough, a gravelly whisper. "Clara," she said, straightening her uniform. "Clara Rossi." Clara Rossi. The name meant nothing to him. And yet, everything. "You have a steady hand," he said. It was the closest he could come to a thank you. She gave a small, tired smile. "It's my job." Leo entered the room then, his face a mask of professional concern. He saw the exchange, the way Julian looked at this unknown nurse, and his internal alarm bells began to ring. This was new territory. "Boss, everything is secure," Leo said. Julian nodded, his gaze not leaving Clara. "See that the nurse is paid. Double the agreed-upon rate. And ensure she has a safe ride home." "Of course," Leo said. Clara stood. "That's not necessary." "The original amount is more than enough," she spoke with a simple dignity that intrigued him. In his world, everyone wanted more. Always. "It is necessary," Julian stated. It was not a suggestion. She seemed to understand this. She simply nodded, gathered her small bag, and with a final, hesitant look at him, she left the room. The space felt colder, emptier, the moment she was gone. Julian watched the closed door for a long time. The memory of her touch lingered on his skin. "Leo," he said, his voice quiet but sharp. "Boss?" "Find out everything about her." Leo's expression did not change, but he felt a shift in the air. This was not business. This was something else entirely. "Everything?" he asked, just to be certain. "Everything," Julian confirmed. "Where she lives. Who her family is. Why a nurse with hands like that is working in a place like this on a Saturday night. I want to know what shadows are following her." Because Julian Gallo knew shadows. And the ones he saw in Clara Ross's eyes were not the kind a young woman should have to carry alone. He recognized the look of someone trapped, of someone fighting a quiet, desperate battle. It was a look he had seen in the mirror many years ago. Leo's report came 2 days later. Julian was in his penthouse office, a sterile space of glass and steel overlooking the city that was his kingdom. The wound in his side was a dull, persistent ache, a reminder of his own mortality. Leo stood before the massive oak desk, a single file in his hand. He was visibly uncomfortable. "Her name is Clara Rossi," Leo began, his voice flat. 28 years old. Top of her class at nursing school. Works 2 jobs. One at the City General Hospital in the oncology ward, the other is freelance, private care. Like us. Julian listened, his face impassive. He steepled his fingers, waiting. "She lives with her mother, Maria Rossi. The mother has severe emphysema, requires an oxygen tank and constant care. Clara is her sole provider. Her father passed away 10 years ago. Here it came. The reason for the shadows. They live in a tenement building on 4th Street, Leo continued. The building is owned by a man named Silas Croft." Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew the name. Croft was a bottom feeder. A loan shark and slumlord who operated on the fringes, preying on the desperate. He was not part of any established organization. He was a parasite, and Julian had no tolerance for parasites in his territory. "Croft holds the mortgage on their apartment," Leo said, his voice dropping. "Maria Ross's medical bills have been catastrophic. Clara took out a series of high-interest loans from him to cover them. The debt is now significant. Over $100,000. The interest rates are criminal." Julian remained silent. The picture was becoming brutally clear. The exhaustion in her eyes. The worn-out soles of her shoes he had noticed. The quiet desperation that drove her to take a high-risk, no-questions-asked job to care for a gunshot victim in a basement. "Croft has been escalating his collection methods," Leo said, and now he couldn't hide the distaste in his voice. "His threatening eviction. Shutting off their heat intermittently in the middle of winter. Last week, he accidentally damaged her mother's oxygen concentrator." A warning. A cold, still fury began to build in Julian's chest. It was a familiar feeling, the one that had guided him for 3 decades. But this time, it felt different. It was not about business, or territory, or respect. It was personal. This man, this Silas Croft, had violated every rule in Julian's book. He was preying on the sick and the helpless. He was tormenting a woman who spent her life easing the suffering of others. A good woman. A woman who had held his hand while he was being cut open. He thought of her thumb moving in slow circles on his skin. An act of pure, unthinking kindness. She had offered him comfort when she had none for herself. She had been his anchor while her own world was sinking. The irony was a bitter pill. He looked at his own hand, half expecting to see the impression of hers still there. "Leo," Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. "Yes, boss." "This Croft. Where can he be found?" "He has a small office above a pawn shop on Kenmare. He's there most nights, counting his money." Julian stood up, ignoring the sharp protest from his side. The physical pain was nothing. A distant annoyance. The rage he felt was a clean, purifying fire. He walked to the vast window and looked down at the sprawling city lights. His city. His rules. His personal code was clear. Business was business. But this was not business. This was an offense against the natural order of things. It was a stain that needed to be wiped clean. The memory of Elena, a ghost that rarely surfaced with such clarity, whispered in his mind. She would have helped Clara. She would have stood against a man like Croft with nothing but the force of her own righteous anger. Julian had other tools at his disposal. He had spent 30 years becoming a monster to keep the other monsters at bay. He had built a wall of fear around his world to protect the memory of the goodness he had lost. Now, a glimpse of that same goodness had appeared again, and it was under threat. The decision was not a decision at all. It was an inevitability. It was the only possible response. He turned from the window, his face set like stone. "Get the car," he said to Leo. "And tell Marco and Sal to meet us. We're going to pay Mr. Croft a visit." Leo's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Julian hadn't personally handled something like this in over a decade. He delegated. He commanded from a distance. For the boss himself to go, this was more than business. This was a judgment. "Boss, are you sure?" Leo asked, the caution in his voice clear. "You're still recovering." Julian's grey eyes met his. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." He was breaking his own rules. Getting personally involved in a street-level problem that had nothing to do with his empire. Exposing himself. Risking complication. For a nurse. A stranger. Or maybe, he thought, not a stranger at all. Maybe she was a reminder. A reminder of the man he was supposed to be, the life he was supposed to have. A reminder of what was worth fighting for. His world was built on a foundation of calculated risk and emotional detachment. He was about to make a move based on neither. He was about to mobilize the full, terrifying force of his organization for one reason and one reason only. Because she had held his hand. The pawn shop was a grimy storefront on a forgotten block, its neon sign flickering like a dying heartbeat. The windows were barred, the door reinforced. It was a place that dealt in desperation. Above it, a single light burned in a second-floor window. Croft's office. Julian sat in the back of his black sedan, the engine idling silently. The street was empty. Leo was in the driver's seat. Marco and Sal, two of his most trusted men, were in a second car parked across the street. They were large, quiet men who moved with the fluid grace of predators. "The back door is reinforced steel," Leo said, his voice low. "Ali is a dead end. He's got a camera over the front door." Julian didn't respond. He was watching the light in the window. He imagined Croft inside, counting his money, feeling safe in his little fortress. A spider in his web. "The plan is simple," Julian said finally, his voice calm. "We are not here to negotiate. We are not here to intimidate. We are here to conclude a piece of business. Leo nodded, understanding the cold finality in his boss's tone. Marco and Sal will disable the camera and take the back alley. They will wait for my signal. You and I will go to the front door. He won't open it, Leo stated. He will, Julian said. People like Croft are greedy, but they are also cowards. And cowards are curious. Julian got out of the car. He moved without a hint of the injury that was still healing beneath his tailored suit. He walked to the front door of the pawn shop, Leo a half step behind him. There was a small, ugly buzzer next to the steel door. Julian pressed it. A crackle of static, then a tinny voice. We're closed. I am here to see Mr. Croft, Julian said, his voice even. My name is Julian Gallo. Silence. The name hung in the air, a threat more potent than any weapon. Julian could almost feel Croft's mind racing on the other side of the door. Julian Gallo. Here. At his door. It was impossible. It had to be a trick. But what if it wasn't? I don't know any Julian Gallo, the voice said, but it had lost its conviction. You own the building at 414 4th Street, Julian continued, not raising his voice. You hold the paper on a tenant there. Maria Rossi. We have a mutual interest in her daughter, Clara. More silence. This was the hook. The mention of Clara. Croft would assume this was about a debt, a collection. He would think Julian was here to claim a piece of the action. Greed would war with fear. A series of heavy clicks echoed from behind the door. The locks were being undone. The door opened a few inches, held by a thick chain. A man's face appeared in the gap. He was weaselly and small, with pale, shifty eyes and a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. Silas Croft. He peered out at Julian. What do you want? Julian gave him a thin, cold smile. To talk. Croft hesitated, then slowly unhooked the chain. He opened the door wider, revealing the cluttered, musty interior of the pawn shop. Upstairs, he grunted, gesturing with his head. Julian stepped inside, Leo following, and the door clicked shut behind them. The air was stale, thick with the ghosts of failed dreams. Broken jewelry, old televisions, a child's bicycle. The detritus of lives derailed by poverty and bad luck. Croft's stock in trade. They followed him up a narrow, creaking staircase to his office. The room was small, dominated by a large metal desk and a massive safe in the corner. Piles of paperwork were everywhere. It was the den of a predator, and it smelled of cheap cigars and avarice. Croft scurried behind his desk, putting the furniture between them. A pathetic attempt at creating a barrier. Look, Gallo, he began, trying for a confident tone. If this is about the Rossi girl's debt, I've got the paperwork right here. It's all legal. She owes me. Julian walked slowly toward the desk. He didn't look at Croft. He looked at the papers. He saw the name Clara Rossi at the top of a ledger, followed by a terrifyingly large number. You damaged an old woman's oxygen machine, Julian said, his voice barely a whisper. Croft flinched. It was an accident. A misunderstanding. You turned off her heat. In February. Building maintenance issues, Croft stammered, sweat now beading on his forehead. You know how it is with these old tenements. Julian finally raised his eyes and met Croft's. The cold fury in them made Croft physically recoil. A woman who spends her days tending to the dying, who works her fingers to the bone to keep her mother alive, this is who you choose to torment. Julian's voice was still quiet, but it filled the small room, vibrating with a barely controlled rage. You are not a businessman, Croft. You are a rat. And my city has a rat problem. Croft's face went pale. He finally understood. This was not about money. This was not a negotiation. I don't know what you're talking about, he whispered, his eyes darting toward a drawer in his desk. A foolish, desperate thought. Leo, who had been standing silently by the door, took took one step forward. It was all that was needed. Croft froze. Julian reached into his jacket and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper and a pen. He placed them on the desk. It was a bill of sale. Blank. "You are going to sign over the deed to the building on 4th Street, Julian said. "And you are going to write off every penny of Clara Ross's debt. You will mark it as paid in full." Croft stared at him, dumbfounded. "You're crazy. That building, her debt, it's worth hundreds of thousands." "Consider it the price of your continued existence," Julian said calmly. He picked up a heavy glass paperweight from the desk. It felt cool and solid in his hand. The hand Clara had held. He looked at it for a moment, then placed it back down. "Or, we can discuss an alternative payment plan. But I assure you, you won't like the terms." The threat was clear, absolute, and terrifyingly real. Croft looked from Julian's dead eyes to Leo's immovable form. He thought of the 2 other men he had glimpsed across the street. The walls were closing in. With a trembling hand, Croft picked up the pen. His signature was a jagged, panicked scrawl. He filled out the paperwork, his movements jerky. Then he went to a filing cabinet, pulled out Clara's file, and with a shaking hand, he stamped it in red ink. "Paid in full." He pushed the documents across the desk. Julian reviewed them. He nodded slowly. Then he pulled out a thick envelope and dropped it on the desk. It landed with a soft thud. "What's this?" Croft asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. $1, Julian said. "For the sale of the building. So it's all legal." The insult was as sharp as a knife. Julian turned to leave. He paused at the door. "You will vacate this city by sunrise. You will take nothing with you but what you can carry. If I ever see your face again, if I ever hear your name spoken within 100 miles of here, I will not be so generous." He looked back at the man, now slumped in his chair, a broken, pathetic figure. "Men like you," Julian said, the words dripping with contempt, "give monsters a bad name." Then he and Leo walked out, leaving Silas Croft in the ruins of his petty kingdom. As they descended the stairs, Julian gave a slight nod. Across the street, Marco and Sal got out of their car and disappeared into the back alley. There were still loose ends to tie up. Evidence to erase. A message to be made permanent. The problem of Silas Croft would not just be solved. It would be erased. He would not be bothering anyone. Ever again. Julian stepped out into the cool night air. The city felt cleaner already. He had broken his rules. He had acted on an impulse, an emotion. And he felt nothing. No regret. No satisfaction. Just a quiet, profound sense of rightness. An equilibrium restored. He got back into the car. In his hand, he held the file. The one with Clara Ross's name on it. He opened it and looked at the red stamp. Paid in full. He had paid a debt. Not hers. His own. A debt to the memory of a kind woman lost long ago, and to the quiet nurse who had reminded him that such kindness still existed in the world. 2 days later, Leo arranged the meeting. It was discreet. A message was delivered to Clara at the hospital, requesting her presence for a follow-up consultation with her recent private patient. A car was sent for her. A car she would recognize. She was brought not to the basement clinic, but to a small, private park that Julian owned, a hidden gem of green space tucked between 2 of his skyscrapers. It was late afternoon, and the autumn sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn. Julian was waiting for her on a bench, dressed not in a suit, but in a simple cashmere sweater and trousers. Without the armor of his tailored clothes, he looked less like a king and more like a man. The wound in his side still pulled if he moved too quickly, a constant reminder of the event that had brought her into his life. Clara approached him hesitantly. She looked tired, as always, but there was a new tension in her face. A fear of the unknown. She was a woman used to being on the receiving end of bad news. "Mr. Gallo," she said, her voice quiet. You wanted to see me. Julian, he corrected her gently. Please. Sit. She sat at the other end of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. She clutched her worn handbag in her lap like a shield. Is your side, are you recovering well? She asked. The nurse in her taking over. I am, he said. Thanks to you. He let the silence hang for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He was a man of action, not words. This part was harder than confronting Croft. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a file. Her file. He placed it on the bench between them. This belongs to you, he said. She looked at it, her brow furrowed in confusion. She opened it. Her eyes scanned the first page, then widened. She flipped through the documents, her breath catching in her throat. She saw the bill of sale for her building. She saw the loan agreements, all stamped with that beautiful, impossible red ink. Paid in full. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She was speechless. The weight of years of struggle, of fear and desperation was suddenly gone. The number that had haunted her sleep, that had driven her to work until she collapsed, had vanished. It was a miracle. And she was sitting next to the man responsible for it. I don't understand, she whispered. How? Silas Croft has decided to retire, Julian said simply. He sold his assets and moved away. She knew it was more than that. She saw the truth in the hard lines of his face. She saw the power and the ruthlessness that lay just beneath the calm surface. He had not negotiated. He had commanded. I can't accept this, she said, shaking her head, though her hands clutched the file as if it were the most precious thing in the world. It's too much. I have to repay you. I will. It will take my whole life, but I will pay you back every cent. Julian looked at her, at the fierce, proud dignity in her tear-filled eyes. There is no debt, he said, his voice soft. You already paid me. Paid you? She asked, confused. I gave you nothing. He looked down at his right hand, flexing the fingers. That night. In that room. You gave me something I thought I had lost a long time ago. Something worth more than all the money Croft ever stole. He didn't say what it was. He didn't need to. He wasn't even sure he could put it into words. Hope? A reminder of goodness? A connection. She stared at him, and for the first time, the fear in her eyes was replaced by something else. A profound, dawning understanding. She saw past the fearsome reputation. She saw the lonely man beneath. Who are you? She asked, the question a genuine, heartfelt plea for comprehension. People talk about you. They say you're a dangerous man. He held her gaze. He could have given her 1,000 different answers. He could have lied. He could have postured. Instead, he gave her the only truth that mattered. Sometimes, the world needs dangerous men to protect the good people from the truly evil ones, he said. His voice was quiet, heavy with the weight of his life. That night, you needed a protector. And for a little while. I got to be the good guy. A tear finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small, plain white card. It had no name, no address. Just a single phone number, embossed in black ink. He offered it to her. The building is yours now. The deed is being transferred to your mother's name. It's safe. You're safe, he said. But if you or your mother ever need anything at all, you call this number. It will find me. She took the card, her fingers brushing his. The brief touch was like an electric current, a memory of that first connection. She stood up, clutching the file and the card to her chest. Thank you, she said. The words were inadequate. They both knew it. But they were all she had. He simply nodded. He watched her walk away, her steps lighter than before, her shoulders less burdened. She was walking back into her life, but it was a new life. A life free from the shadow that had tormented her. Julian remained on the bench long after she was gone, watching the sun dip below the skyscrapers. He had changed the course of her life with an act of force. But she had changed something in him with a simple act of kindness. He did not know what the future held. He did not know if he would ever see her again. But he knew that for the first time in 30 years, the fortress he had built around his heart had a crack in it. And through that crack, a tiny, fragile ray of light was getting in. 1 year later. The community clinic on the west side was bright and clean. It served a neighborhood that had been neglected for decades, offering free and subsidized care to families who had nowhere else to go. It had opened 6 months ago, funded by a massive, anonymous donation from a mysterious benefactor. The head nurse moved through the wards with a calm, confident energy. Her name was Clara Rossi. Her eyes no longer held the shadows of exhaustion and fear. They were bright, clear, and full of purpose. She greeted patients by name, comforted crying children, and guided her staff with a gentle but firm hand. She was where she was meant to be. Her mother, Maria, was living comfortably in their small, clean apartment. The deed was in her name, a fortress against the world. A new, state-of-the-art oxygen machine hummed quietly in the corner of her room. Her health had stabilized. She had even started painting again, her small canvases filled with bright, hopeful colors. Clara was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. Sometimes, late at night, she would take out the small, plain white card from her wallet. She never had to use the number. But knowing it was there, knowing that somewhere in the city a powerful, solitary man was watching over her, was a source of quiet comfort. A guardian ghost. Miles away, in a penthouse office that overlooked the entire city, Julian Gallo stood by his window. His empire was running smoothly. His world was in order. The wound in his side had long since healed into a pale scar, a faint reminder of the night his life had pivoted. His office was as sterile and imposing as ever, a monument to a man who dealt in power and control. But there was one small, new detail. On the corner of his vast, empty desk, next to the photograph of a smiling, dark-haired woman named Elena that no one ever asked about, sat a small, simple object. It was a single, neatly wrapped bandage. The kind a nurse would use. Clean. Simple. Unassuming. He never touched it. But every day, he looked at it. It was his memento. A symbol not of a debt paid, but of a connection made. A reminder that in a world of violence and shadows, a single, gentle touch could be the most powerful force of all. He had saved her from a monster, but in doing so, she had saved him from becoming one entirely. True strength is not just the power to destroy, but the will to protect. True wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you give away. And sometimes, a person's entire world can change, not with a bang, but with the quiet, steady pressure of a hand holding theirs in the dark, a silent promise that they are not alone. And that promise, once made, can echo for a lifetime.